Greetings hobbyists, this is Artisans of All, and in this video we're going to start making this fantasy or historical looking building. Now before we go any further, I should say that this video is probably more an intermediate level than some of the videos I've done before. It's going to use tools that I've covered previously on the channel, and I don't want to go through those all again because it's going to get a bit boring for people that have seen them already. So instead, whenever I'm using one of those tools, I will reference it, and there'll be a link in the description and in the top right hand corner so that you can go and have a look at those videos if you need to, or you're not confident with the tools, or you just want to have a look at them in a bit more depth than I'm going to cover in this video. The other thing that I'll mention straight off is that I am going to use machine tools, hard ops and box cutter. Machine tools is a free add-on, box cutter and hard ops are paid for, and I'm just using those to make my life a little bit quicker and easier, again for this tutorial so it doesn't take too long. But you would be able to do all of the things that I'm going to cover on this without those two add-ons. It's just I'm going to use them, and I will say that they do make life a lot easier, and they are really worth getting. Again, there's tutorials on those. The links are in the top right hand corner coming up, and they're also in the description. So without any more faffing around, let's get straight on with this. I'm going to start by looking at how to make the stone bottom floor of this building. And the first thing I ever do when I'm working on a project like this, especially for terrain, so Shift A, and I'm going to bring in a cube just to get an idea of how big I want this to be. And I'm just going to press N to bring out the M panel, go to item, and then we're going to start changing some of these dimensions. So I'm going to go with something on the X-axis being 200 wide, and then on the Y, let's go for 150. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that should probably do. I think that'll be all right. And then on the Z-axis, I'm going to go for 60 for the height. Now, this does seem a little bit tall if you have a look at a 28mm model, but I'm going a little bit excessive on this because they're going to have a base. So you need to make some decisions here on if you want to sort of include the base height in things, and that's going to be coming in when you do things like doors as well. Do you want a model to be able to actually walk through the door? So then that's going to be your choice. The other thing is I'm just going to press GZ and then I'm going to move this up 30, which is obviously half of 60, just to have it on level, which is going to be important for one of the things we're going to do later. Then, because this is only going to be a guide, I don't want to be seeing this as a solid object, so I'm going to come over here to the object properties, go down to viewport display, yours will probably be closed, and then I'm going to change this from being textured to being wire, and that means that I can now just see the outline of it. And then if I press F2, we can rename this as guide. The other thing I like to have is something that represents the size of a model. So I'm going to press Shift and A and bring in a cylinder. And that needs to be, well, the standard base is going to be somewhere either 25 or 32. So I'm going to do 32 just for the larger size. But because this is radius, we're going to divide that by 2 to give 16. You could have just typed in 16, but it's good to get you used to using the maths. And then in terms of depth, while the standard height of a 28mm model is, well, 28 generally to the eye, if it's some sort of heroic scale, we do want to include the base. So I'm going to put that as somewhere in the region of 40. And then I'm just going to G and bring that over to the side. And obviously this looks very big in comparison to the size of the building, but that's because it's, well, mostly the base. So the model will look much smaller than that, but it gives you an idea of what you can fit and if models can hide behind it and so on. So we've got those there. Let's F2 and name that 28mm model. And at this point we can start creating our walls with some nice guides to know what size we're going for. So I'm going to press N to get rid of the M panel, don't need it for now, and we'll press Shift and A. I'm going to come to the extras and we're going to go to Wall Factory. Now if you don't have this, or you've never used Wall Factory before, there's a link in the top right hand corner and in the description for one of my videos going through Wall Factory. So we've got our wall here, and we can see what's useful about Wall Factory is it makes all of our blocks for us. It's a massive time saver. And we want to start sorting out our dimensions. So we've got the start and the end of it, and we're going to have that as -100, and then on the other side we're going to go for 100. So we've got that now to the correct width. We've got the bottom as 0, and we need to change the top to being 60. So we've got that there, and obviously these bricks are tiny at this point, so we can fiddle around with the scale of our bricks, and this is going to be in here in the block sizing. So let's start with the most obvious ones, and that's going to be the width of this block. Well, actually they call it the depth of the block, so let's not confuse that, and at the moment it says 2mm. I'm going to change that to 10, so it's effectively 1 centimeter in width. You could make it thinner than that, and obviously it does look a little bit out of scale with the tiny bricks, but we'll deal with that in a second. And then we've got variances. So I'm going to set a minimum depth here of being no smaller than, let's say, 9. And then I want a variance that can go up to, let's say, 4 millimeters in difference, and have a look at how that looks. Possibly going to be a bit much. Let's change that to 2, and then once we've changed the block size, we can always change that back. Then we're going to go with the width of the blocks, and being that these are large stone blocks, I would say something like 15 would be fine, maybe with a minimum of 10 and a variance of up to 5, so we can get some nice variations there. And then let's get the height sorted, and again I'm going to try that with 10. No, that looks awful, so let's go down to maybe 5. Possibly still a bit much. Let's set a minimum of 3, and then we'll change the variance to be plus or minus, let's say, 4. Let's have a look how that looks. And then finally, we're going to change the grout thickness, because that's so thin we wouldn't even be able to see it, these tiny little bits there. Let's put that as 0.5, so half a millimeter. And suddenly we're looking at something a bit better. Now let's maybe add that to 0.6, just so we've got a little bit more thickness, and then we can fiddle around with these volumes until we get something that we want. Now you'll also notice there's a hole here at this point. That's because it's trying to put in an opening. We're not going to bother with that. We want to deal with our own openings, and that's what we've got at this point. So we've got our model there, and this is the size of these stone blocks. I actually quite like that at this point, but we've got some other bits to fiddle around with, and that's this edging is going to be very important. The edging is just the gap that's coming here, and bear in mind that we're going to want to put walls on each of the 4 sides. We're going to need that to be approximately the same thickness here, so I'm going to change that to our block depth, which is 10. So now we should have the space to do that. Now, one other thing, and this is entirely up to you, I'm going to put merge blocks on, and what that does is that means that you can have some larger blocks that go across too. And I actually use this as almost like a seed. Normally with Blender you have things called seeds where you can fiddle around with if you don't like the sizes, and if you just click that a couple of times you can start merging on and off until you get a size that you like. For example, I actually quite like this, but I don't want my larger blocks at the top. That would make more sense to them be at the bottom, but overall I like this sort of block setup. So I'm going to go with this. Now if you ever do that by accident and you don't like what you're getting, you can always just press F9 and that will bring up the last menu that you had. You can only use that if you haven't done anything with this. For example, if I G and Y to move that out, let's go to side view so that we can do that more easily. Yep, that's about where we want it. Now if I press F9, it just comes up with the move that we've got there because it's doing the last action. Now I did say that I want the larger blocks at the bottom, so let's fix that. I'm just going to press SZ and then -1, and then I'm going to have to G and Z to move that up. And let's move that down to around there on the Z axis. So we're looking pretty good at this point. Now we have got these sticking out a bit further than we wanted, and that's because we fiddled around with the dimensions of this inset, so actually extended them out the side. A couple of ways of dealing with that. The easiest way is just pressing S and X and shrinking that in slightly until we've got approximately what we want. And then Control and A and apply the scale just so we don't have any problems later. So now we talk about this in that tutorial that I mentioned at the beginning, and there's a little few other bits that we do, like making a round tower. But there is one thing that always gets forgotten about this, and this is if we want to make another wall on, let's say, this axis, we want to make our side walls, there is a problem. If I press Shift and A, Mesh, and then bring in Extras, and then again Wall Factory, it will come up with exactly the same settings again, but notice this wall is different. It doesn't line up. So we're not going to have things that fit perfectly into those gaps. So we're not going to be able to do that. And that's one of the slightly frustrating things about this wall generator. It'd be lovely if you could make a whole building out of it. Instead, you're going to have to make this using this wall. So what we're going to do is grab this wall, Shift and D, escape so it's still there, and then I'm just going to press R, Z, and then 90. And we're going to find some problems straight away. So let's start working on this and dealing with those problems. So let's G that to about here, and then let's have a look. Now at this point we've got our L section, but we need to sort this out. This is way too thick. It's coming over the bounds of our side that we want. So we're going to need to delete some of those blocks, and it's quite useful to have a guide for that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to grab this block here and this block here, and then do this. You'll see why in a second. I'm going to press Alt and D to duplicate it, and notice that was Alt and D instead of Shift and D, and what that has made is a linked duplicate of each of these walls. We'll talk about what that's going to do in a second, and then I'm going to press R, rotate that around by 180, and then I can move this out to that corner, somewhere about there. So if I do want to move in and make this a bit more exact, I can do. It's entirely up to you how precise you want to be with the measurements and dimensions of your building. And then what I'm going to do is come into this one, and we're going to start modifying it so that it's the correct thickness. So easiest way to do that, if we just come into side view, is just grab these and start deleting some blocks. So what I'm going to do is go into face mode, and then I'm going to come into X-ray mode, and then just delete as many faces as I need to up to the line. Now we're going to have to fix this later, but that's fine. It's still the fastest way of doing it. Oh, and I've left some there. So let's delete those as well. So we've got some leftover faces, that one needs to be deleted, and we've got some locations without faces at all. Don't worry about that for now. So what we're going to do is have a look where there's some overlap. So for a start, there's overlap on this bottom one here. So all I'm going to do is select one face, press L, and that's going to select all the linked faces, and then I can just delete that. So that's nice and easy, and actually that one's lined up fairly well. Over here we've got a spare face there. Let's delete that face. And then actually we're going to need to move this out slightly. So let's just GY and bring that out to somewhere around here. Now I've also got some overlap on this side, so we'll deal with those faces in a second. Here we've got a block, again L, delete that out, and then check for our gap there. That's probably a bit small, so let's G and Y that back a little bit. And it's just going through that process, making sure that you've got something that looks nice. That one actually needs to be brought out a bit. So I've got two options here. I could either extend this one out, or I can just press E and bring that out to be a nice small block at the end. Entirely up to you how you want to go with that. Select L and delete those faces there. Too much of a gap here, so let's G and Y that across. That'll do. This one is looking fine, but it's far too far out. So let's go into edge mode, Alt select that edge, F, and then we're going to G and Y that back. So just a little bit of mucking around and clean up here. It's L, delete all of those. This one here, again, should be fine. So let's F, and then G and Y, bring that back a little bit. Somewhere around there. And then this one, select L, select everything, delete, and then we've got rid of all of it. But the gap's too big. Face mode. And then G and Y. So looking pretty happy with that. We have got, oh, I think I missed one there. Let's fix that one. G and Y. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. Now, that could possibly do with a bit bigger gap. Now, what's cool about this is because we pressed Alt and D, we made linked duplicates. What that means is that everything I did to this wall has been done to the copy of it. So you'll notice that one's got fixed as well. So we haven't had to do it twice. I will say, if you notice, there's some slight odd shading here. That's because this is slightly odd. And if I go into face orientation, oh, that's odd. All of these are the wrong way around. I wonder if the wall builder does something a little bit funny with this. Okay, well, easily solved. Let's go into vertex mode, A to select everything, and then Shift and N to check everything out. And then we'll select the other wall. Again, go into vertex mode, A, Shift and N, and then we've sorted all of that out. That's an interesting one. Didn't realise that it does that. Do have a look at yours and check that it hasn't done the same. So now we've got everything oriented the right way. We just need to have a look at this wall section. Now at this point, I'm just going to be doing the same thing over again. So I'm just going to speed this bit up. But effectively, it's just tweaking those vertices, and you can see how useful things like X-ray mode are. But the important bit is just making sure that the different blocks are all relatively offset from each other, so you actually have this nice brick pattern. Otherwise it gets a bit boring, and no one really wants that. Now at this point, our building isn't actually going to print successfully because, well, it's just a selection of blocks that are going to, well, print and then, well, it wouldn't attach. It's just not going to work. We need to make this solid. Now, we're not going to actually do the final part of this. We're not going to join everything together until right at the very end, so that we've got options with how we're going to work with parts of the building. And I generally really advise that whenever you're doing something for 3D design. So all I'm going to do is Shift and A, and I'm going to bring in a cube, and then we're just going to press S to scale that up until we get to approximately the right width. This is going to be far too high at this point. But notice we want to have this less than the blocks. We want there to be an indent so that we've got, well, here a gap so we can see the mortar between them. And actually, this possibly could be a little bit more exaggerated on some of them. So I'm going to press S and Y and just scale that in. So we've got somewhere around there. Then I'm going to press, let's just deal with the height. So let's just go into vertex mode. And that's because the origins at the bottom, we moved everything up. So I'm just going to G and Z that down to just barely off the top. And then same with the bottom. G and Z, bring that up so it's just about at the bottom. So just about there. And then object mode, and then S and X. Let's scale that out somewhere to around there. And let's check that out. And again, no, that needs to be a lot less. So S and X, somewhere around there looks about right. And now we need to make it so that we don't have, well, the center, unless you wanted to print this as one massive cube. But I'd really recommend against that just for, well, the amount of resin you use. That would be insane. So I'm going to just go into face mode, select the top face there, select the bottom face there, go into top view. Then we're going to press I to inset, and we're just going to inset that as much as we need. So probably about there is right on the front and back wall. And I'll just press S and X to scale that to be right on the side walls. Then to see if we've got this right, we can just press edge and then bridge edge loops, and that's going to just have bridged. If I isolate this, you can see it's just made it hollowed out in the middle. And yeah, this looks okay on the inside and on the out. Now I've deliberately chosen to leave these bricks in the middle. I don't know if I'm going to do anything with the inside in terms of making it look a little bit more interesting, but that's your choice. And I thought might as well leave it there because there's no harm in having that internal detail. Now I'm going to name that cube. So F2, I'm just going to call it wall inner, just so I know what it is and that I can find that easily, because this is going to be one where we're going to find it a bit difficult to select. So it's going to be nice and easy to select it over in our object outliner. So it's a pretty good start to our building. It's looking about right. I mean, if we zoom out, it's going to look a little bit iffy because of those internal walls, and at this distance we get a little bit of Z fighting, but that's not a problem. We know that it's not really an issue. So what else do we want to do here? So let's add a little bit more detail to this, and actually I'm going to hide this inner wall just to make this easier to see. And the first thing I think I'm going to want is, well, a door. So let's just boolean out some of these blocks to get that sorted. It's much quicker than just deleting some of them when we want a specific shape. So let's come into side view. I'm going to select that wall and we're just going to start deleting things. Now I've got box cutter, which I'm going to use. There's a link in the top right hand corner and in the description to some videos on box cutter. If not, you could just use a normal boolean to do this. So I'm going to press Alt and W to activate that. It's already as a box. Let's change that to view, though in this instance it doesn't really make a difference. And actually, before I do this, I'm just going to G this over so that I know that I could fit a model through. And actually, I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to isolate those two so that I can just see the blocks that I'm interested in. So let's select this and let's cut this out. So now I'm going to leave a little bit of extra width just so that we've got some space to put a door frame in. And let's cut through there, and we're probably going to want to go all the way to those top blocks. So something like that should be enough. Just making sure that I'm going all the way to the top. Double click, and we've got that nicely cut out. That probably is going to look fine. Maybe a little wide for a door. Depends if you want that to be able to fit with your base. But I think it will look all right. And then I also want to have a window. So let's get a window cut out as well. So I'm going to keep that to the same height as the top of the door. And I think that's going to be a bit smaller. So let's come in and let's go for something like there. That's probably going to be all right. And you'll notice I haven't selected that perfectly there. It's a little bit off, and also I've ended up with that wall section there, which is going to look a little bit naff. So if I want, so again using hard ops, I can Q, ever scroll, bring that in, and then I can just go into face mode, select that top face, G and Z that up to get rid of those, and then select the side face, and then G and X to get rid of that little bit there, and that should be fine. Let's press H to hide that. Let's get out of isolation mode. And we've got that going on. It's looking pretty good. I think we're probably going to want some windows on the back wall as well. So let's select this one, Q, ever scroll and grab that. Shift and D, and then Y to move it on the Y axis, somewhere over to about there. You'll notice this has been parented to the original object. That's something Box Cutter does. We could get rid of that, but it's not really a problem at this point. So I'm going to select that, Shift select that, and then Control and minus to cut that out. And then let's just mirror that. So there, Shift Alt X, drag it across, and now I've got two windows on that side. We have got a slight difference in thickness here, so actually let's go back to this, go to face mode, grab this face, and then G and Y to get rid of those. So we've got our windows and our doors cut out. Easy. And now there is one more thing that we finally need to remember to do, and this is quite important. If you remember, we hid our inner wall, and at the moment that's still there, and that's not being cut through. And that's something we're going to want to get deleted as well. And I actually do want this deleted a little bit further out, again, so that mortar is slightly further in. So what we're going to do, let's just move you out the way, is come to this, Q, ever scroll, select that, Shift and D, so we've got a duplicate, and then I can just press S to scale it slightly larger, and then select the inner wall and Control and minus. And then we've got this mortar that's further inside, and it doesn't take particularly long. At this point, once again, I'm just going to speed up the footage. I'm doing the same thing repetitively. At each point, I'm just making sure I copy the cutter using Everscroll, increasing it a little bit in size, making sure that it's wide enough on each of the axes, and then I'm just going to cut that out of that inner wall so that we have that mortar effect. And that is the benefit of doing this with these blocks instead of using something like alpha textures. We could have done all of this stone using alpha textures, but these cutouts would start to look a little bit funny. Now at this point, we have got a slight issue, and this is going to depend on how detailed you want to be with this. You are perfectly fine leaving this, but you'll notice that these blocks here, and then when we add extra floors on, be very unlikely to be supported by this wooden frame. So what we want to do is actually turn this into one long block that would be supporting its weight on all of the bricks on either side. Now here we come into a problem, which is if we do anything to this wall and its blocks, will actually affect the wall behind it as well, because they're linked together, if you remember when we used Alt and D to link them. So what we're going to have to do is separate these. So all you do for that is you select the wall that you want to separate, so I'm just going to use that one, come down here to the object data properties, and you'll see here there is a 2, and this is effectively saying that this is this wall copied twice and they're sharing attributes, and then if you modify one you're going to modify the other. So I'm going to click that, and then now I can modify this without it affecting the wall at the back, because otherwise when I deleted blocks here, it's going to delete blocks there as well. So at that point now I can come into face mode, and let's choose some blocks to get rid of. So I'm going to get rid of this block, so I can come over and press L. Do note you don't actually have to click then press L. I have a tendency to do that to make sure nothing else is selected, but you can just click off, make sure nothing's selected, and then L there and L there, and then delete those faces, so that's everything gone. And then let's make it so that this one, G and X, can move that over here, and then that one, G and X, bring it all the way across. That possibly needs a little bit more of a gap. No, that's okay. And then I'm going to grab this face at the front, and then G and Y, and bring that out a little bit more, so it just looks like a larger block. If you really wanted to, you could quite exaggerate this by coming out like really far. It's up to you what you want. I'm going to go with something like there. Then at this point I'm going to do the same to the different 3 windows, the one at the front and the 2 at the back. And again, let's speed that up just because it's more of the same and we don't want to get bored just doing the same thing repeatedly. Now I really want this building to have a fireplace because, well, it seems the sort of thing that you'd need, and also it gives a chance to have a chimney that's stone going all the way up the building, which is going to make it look more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab those 2 walls, I'm going to Shift and D, and then Shift and Z to make sure it doesn't change on the Z axis, and bring that over to somewhere around here, I think. And I'm going to do this in a slightly quicker version of what I did over here, just to make it a little bit less time consuming, because, well, it's not going to be the main corner of these walls, so we can probably get away with it. And also, you can do it this way if you choose to speed things up. So let's have a look again, and I'm going to bring that to approximately where I want the fireplace, somewhere like there, maybe on that back wall, but not all the way up to the wall, so we've got an interesting shape to our building. And then we're going to need to delete out some blocks. So let's think how thick I want this. So what I'm going to do is go into Shift Z to X-ray mode. I'm going to go into face mode, and I'm just going to W to get out of box cutter. And let's just grab those faces somewhere around there, I think, and then delete and faces. And then we've got this going on. And just as a quicker way of cleanup, what I'm going to do is go to object mode, Shift and S, bring the object origin to the geometry, and then I can press Alt X if I've got hard ops, and do a symmetry. So now we've got exactly the same going on both sides, which is going to make this much easier to sort out. Effectively, we can just drag this wall across, so it's really going to speed things up. If you don't have hard ops, you can still do this. All you do is go into, let's say, vertex mode A to make sure everything's selected, mesh, symmetrize, and then at the moment it's going minus X to positive X. We want positive X to minus X, and you've got that done. So you can do it without hard ops, it's just a little bit more faff. Then, just to make this a little bit less really obviously symmetrical, I'm going to fix some of these bits, and also we've got something a little bit funky going on here. So what I'm going to do is isolate this just so we can have a look at it, and then we're going to fix some of the more weird looking things, like there seems to be a slight problem going on with that block there as well. So let's go into vertex mode, and actually I'm going to A, M, and merge by distance, which might solve that. No, it doesn't. So let's grab those vertices there, and yeah, look, we've got something that was so close that it's causing a problem. So what I'm going to do here is just go into face mode, L, select that, delete those faces. That will solve that being a problem, and then I can just G, Y, bring that across, and then I can just Alt X and do the symmetry again to solve that problem, and it hasn't affected anything else. Then I can sort out some of these little bits, like this little block there looks silly, so let's grab that, G and Y, and then I can move that across. Notice I don't want to touch this edge, that's going to be a problem, and then I'm going to do the same over here, G and Y, let's put that there. And then yeah, we're pretty much sorted. What it is worth doing is just going along some of these and then again doing the same, just to make sure that it's not actually symmetrical, and those bits where you'd really notice the fact that it's completely the same on both sides, we can make it so it's a little bit less obvious. Again, this bit's totally optional, just depends on how much time you want to put into this. Right, out of isolation mode, and we've got that pretty much done. Now I want to do the same with this one. Probably want it sticking out maybe about that far into the building. So again, face mode, grab a load of faces, something like there to get it approximately right. Delete and faces, and then grab that, Shift and S, to geometry, and then symmetrize. And we've got that pretty much sorted. Let's have a look at those next to each other. So we'll isolate it, and again, few little bits to fix. For example, that one looks silly, so face, grab there, G and X. Anything else that we want. Now, this one's going to be less of a problem because we're never going to really see this. It's going across the wall, so that's probably going to be fine. And then what I can do now is grab that and that one, Shift Alt X and that way to mirror it, that one and that one, Shift Alt X and mirror it, and then we've got our blocks. If I just isolate this, just to show what we've done, you can see that that lines up really nicely. So really quick way of doing that, entirely up to you if you want to be that, well, sort of lazy, because you could do that with the whole of this building. I am going to move these G and X slightly out so we've got more of the fireplace on the outside of the building to add a bit more of an interesting dimension there. Now, being a chimney, this is going to need to be taller, and it's going to need to come to the top of the building. Not sure how high the building is going to be at this point, so I'm going to be a little bit excessive on this. So let's grab this one. So just so we can fiddle around with this later, what I'm going to do is grab that. In fact, do I want to join these together at this point? Let's leave it. And then what I'm going to do is just add an array modifier. And we don't want this relative offset. We want this constant offset. And we're going to do that on the z-axis. So 0 there. And then let's just rise that up as much as we need. So somewhere like that. Now I've just noticed a problem here. And that is that the bottom of this is one of the inset ones. And the top of it is one of the inset ones. So maybe we don't want to do this. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to grab both of these, and I'm just going to do this manually. So Shift D, Z, and let's bring that up to somewhere. And then we're going to go into vertex mode of all of them, grab those vertices, delete, and faces. And now I can bring that object down, G and Z, so that we've now got that there. And we've now not got the weird situation where we've got two stones that look like they're overlapping. And at this point we're fine adding in our array modifier, so I'm just going to do that quickly, again with both bits, because we haven't joined these together yet, and we're just moving everything over to be a constant offset and making sure it's only being moved on the Z-axis, and we're just going to work out exactly where that needs to be. So we do have this situation now where we've got this merging into each other, and we want to avoid that. So let's select this, and using box cutter, just going to cut out something like there. And actually this might need to be a little bit wider on this side. No, that looks pretty good. And then we're going to do the same for our inner wall. So let's go down to our inner wall here. But our inner wall we don't want to cut as far. We want it to come into this so we do have an overlap. So let's just H that and H that to make this easier. And then I'm going to come here and then we'll Q, ever scroll, grab that, Shift and D to duplicate it, S and X, no, Y to make that somewhere around there. And then select our wall, Control and minus, and then H. And we can bring back those two walls. So now we've got our chimney, and that's going to work for this bottom layer. Now we also need to make a inner wall for our chimney, and exactly the same process. All we're going to do, Shift A, Mesh, Cube, S to scale it up. Let's bring that somewhere around there so we can see how tall it needs to be, or how wide it needs to be. Let's go to about there, G and Z that. So we've got it starting at the right point, and then vertices, and then W to get rid of box cutter, and then that's G and Z those up to somewhere around there. And then again, face, and we're just going to eye somewhere about there, and then edge and bridge edge loops. There we go. And then finally, let's just name that again so we can get rid of it and hide it if we want to. F2, chimney, inner. Cool, and then we can hide that and bring back that wall. Right, so there we go. So that is the beginnings of our house. Hopefully you're liking where these videos are going, and being a little bit more in depth on a whole project is going to give you a bit more of a holistic idea of how to complete a project like this. In the next video, we're going to be having a look at how to do the second floor, which is going to be a combination of wood and some sort of plaster. Do let me know in the comment section how you feel about this. Do you want these all in one go, or should I be spacing them out with smaller videos in between? So if you wanted to follow along, you can maybe do this each weekend, and maybe doing these twice a week is a bit too much. Do say in the comments, that way I can pace it correctly for you. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Click that subscribe button so that you know when the next video comes out.